Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Before we begin today's story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below and tell me your city and state or your country if you're joining us from somewhere else. It's always wonderful to see people from so many different places sharing these stories together. Now, let's begin. Sometimes, all it takes is one ordinary moment to change a life forever. Sometimes the smallest dollar carries the heaviest hope. Naomi Carter pressed the single crumpled $1 bill flat against the convenience store counter with the careful fingertips of someone who had learned to make every cent feel important. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, washing the tiny neighborhood market in a pale glow that made everything look more tired than it really was. Behind her, the steady buzz of refrigerators blended with the rhythmic beeping of the cash register, while outside, freezing rain tapped gently against the front windows. It was nearly 9 o'clock on a Thursday evening, and the store smelled faintly of fresh coffee, cardboard boxes, and warm bread that would be discounted before closing. Naomi's dark wool coat was still damp from the walk, tiny droplets clinging to the sleeves as if reluctant to let go. She tucked a loose strand of black hair behind her ear before glancing toward the entrance, where 7-year-old Ethan sat patiently on a weathered wooden bench beneath the awning, hugging his faded blue backpack against his chest while watching raindrops race each other down the glass. His inhaler rested inside the side pocket where she always kept it within reach. Earlier that afternoon, she had spent nearly every dollar she had on his prescription refill, smiling at him as if nothing was wrong, while quietly calculating how to stretch the refrigerator's remaining groceries until Monday's paycheck arrived. The single dollar left in her wallet had almost gone toward a loaf of bread. Almost. Instead, something she couldn't explain had guided her eyes toward the colorful display of scratch-off tickets beside the register. Not because she believed in miracles. She had stopped believing in miracles years ago, but because sometimes hope was the only thing that still fit inside $1. "Just one Emerald Millions ticket," she said softly. The elderly cashier smiled with tired kindness, slid one ticket from the stack, and handed it across the counter. Naomi exchanged the bill without hesitation, then carefully placed the ticket inside her palm as though it might break if she squeezed too tightly. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't dreaming about mansions or luxury cars or impossible jackpots. She was imagining something much smaller, paying next month's rent before the notice appeared on her apartment door, buying Ethan the winter boots that actually fit instead of another used pair from the church donation shelf, sleeping through one night without waking every hour wondering which bill would have to wait. Outside, Ethan caught her eye through the window and gave her the small thumbs up he always offered whenever she looked worried. Naomi answered with the same quiet smile she had practiced for years, the kind mothers perfected when they wanted their children to believe everything would somehow be okay. The bell above the entrance chimed as another customer stepped inside. Conversations seemed to soften without anyone realizing why. The man who entered wore a charcoal overcoat tailored with effortless precision, rainwater sliding from polished leather shoes that had probably never stepped into a puddle until tonight. Marcus Ellison rarely visited neighborhood convenience stores. His driver had stopped for fuel 2 blocks away after a 12-hour day filled with board meetings, acquisition contracts, and interviews that praised him as one of America's most disciplined billionaire executives. He had walked the remaining distance simply to clear his mind before returning to another empty penthouse overlooking downtown Chicago. Success had become strangely quiet lately. It sounded less like celebration and more like elevators, conference calls, and expensive silence. He barely noticed the rows of snacks or lottery advertisements as he approached the coffee station near the register. His attention lingered only long enough to order a black coffee before checking an unread message from his assistant about tomorrow's investor breakfast. Naomi thanked the cashier and reached for the small plastic scratching coin attached beside the display. She had barely touched the silver coating when the cashier looked down at the barcode, paused for half a heartbeat, then reached toward the scanner. Before the machine could beep, a calm voice behind her broke the silence. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his tone polite but certain enough to make everyone nearby stop moving. Naomi slowly turned around, still holding the untouched ticket between her fingers. Marcus looked directly at the number printed along its edge before meeting her eyes with quiet confidence. "I believe that scratch ticket is mine." For a moment, no one spoke. Even the steady hum of the refrigerators seemed to fade beneath the unexpected weight of those 6 words. Naomi looked down at the untouched ticket still resting between her fingers, then back at the stranger whose calm expression carried neither anger nor accusation, only certainty. She searched his face for some hint that this was a misunderstanding waiting to solve itself. Instead, she found composed gray eyes that had likely spent years making difficult decisions without hesitation. The cashier blinked several times before clearing his throat. "Sir, you are saying that ticket belongs to you?" Marcus nodded once. "I stopped here about 20 minutes ago on my way back from a meeting. I bought coffee and a scratch ticket. I must have left it on the counter." His voice remained measured, almost gentle, as though he believed facts alone would settle everything. Naomi instinctively loosened her grip on the ticket. She could still feel the rough paper pressing lightly against her fingertips. "I watched him hand me this one," she answered quietly, looking toward the cashier instead of Marcus. "I paid $1. She did not raise her voice. She did not sound defensive. She simply stated what had happened. The elderly cashier frowned, rubbing the back of his neck as he replayed the evening in his mind. Customers had come and gone through the rain. Coffee cups, lottery tickets, change scattered across the counter. His memory suddenly felt less reliable than it had 1 minute earlier. "I know you paid," he admitted slowly. "I remember taking your dollar." He glanced toward the ticket display, now missing one card from the row. "But I honestly cannot remember if another ticket was left here earlier." Naomi lowered her eyes for only a second. That single moment was enough for old memories to return without invitation. She remembered standing at another counter years ago while someone assumed she could not afford the groceries in her cart. She remembered explaining to a landlord that she had mailed the rent before being told that excuses did not pay bills. She remembered hospital paperwork after Ethan was born, every question carrying the quiet assumption that raising him alone meant she had already failed. It was remarkable how often people asked struggling mothers to prove they were telling the truth. Outside the front window, Ethan noticed the conversation growing unusually still. He stood from the bench and pressed one small hand against the glass, trying to catch his mother's attention without interrupting. Naomi immediately smiled at him. The same reassuring smile she always found no matter how exhausted she felt. Ethan smiled back, completely unaware that the last hopeful dollar his mother owned was suddenly hanging between uncertainty and disbelief. Marcus followed her gaze toward the little boy waiting outside. Something softened inside him, though he could not have explained why. Perhaps it was the quiet trust on the child's face. Or perhaps it reminded him of photographs stored somewhere in the back of his apartment, pictures of himself standing beside a father who had once promised that integrity mattered more than success. That lesson had slowly disappeared beneath decades of boardrooms, negotiations, and balance sheets. "I am not accusing you of stealing," Marcus said after a pause. "If there has been a mistake, I simply want to make sure it is corrected." Naomi met his eyes for the first time since he had spoken. "Neither do I," she replied gently. "But I cannot hand over something I honestly believe I bought." There was no hostility between them, only two people standing on opposite sides of certainty. A younger customer near the refrigerated drinks quietly pulled out his phone, curiosity overcoming discretion. Another shopper whispered to her husband. The atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly, not because anyone knew the truth, but because strangers often sensed conflict long before they understood it. The cashier looked helplessly between them. "Maybe," he began, "maybe we should check the security camera." Relief flickered across Naomi's face, but it vanished almost immediately when the cashier's expression changed again. Although, he sighed heavily, "the camera over this register has been acting up all week. It records, but sometimes it skips several minutes." Marcus looked toward the small black camera mounted above the lottery display. It blinked with its familiar red light, offering confidence without certainty. Naomi closed her fingers around the ticket again, not possessively, but protectively, as though she were shielding the last fragile piece of hope she had allowed herself to hold. Then, before anyone else could speak, she took a slow breath and surprised everyone in the store, including Marcus. "Do not cash it," she said quietly, placing the ticket back onto the counter herself. "Seal it in an envelope. Write the time, today's date, and both of our names across the seal. Until we know whose it truly is, it belongs to neither of us." The cashier carefully slid the untouched ticket into a plain white envelope, his weathered hands moving with surprising precision, as though every fold carried the weight of someone else's future. He wrote the date, the exact time, and both names across the sealed flap before placing it inside the small office safe beneath the counter. The click of the metal door echoed softly through the quiet store. No one reached for the envelope again. Naomi exhaled slowly, feeling something inside her loosen. Whatever happened next, at least the truth would have a chance to arrive before anyone claimed victory. Marcus watched her with growing curiosity. Most people, faced with even the possibility of a life-changing prize, would have argued harder or demanded immediate answers. She had done the opposite. She had willingly stepped away from the very thing she might have needed most. It did not fit the picture he had unconsciously built the moment he saw her standing at the lottery display. The younger customer who had quietly started recording lowered his phone, looking almost disappointed that no dramatic confrontation had unfolded. Another shopper whispered, "She could have walked out with it." An older woman standing near the bakery shelves answered softly, "Maybe she cares more about being right than being rich." Naomi did not hear them. Her attention had already shifted toward the window where Ethan was now drawing little circles in the fogged glass with one finger. She thanked the cashier with a gentle nod before pulling her wallet from her coat pocket. It opened almost weightlessly. Inside were an identification card, an insurance card, a faded family photograph of Ethan at 4 years old wearing a paper crown from preschool, and exactly 12 cents in loose change. Nothing else. She closed it before anyone could accidentally notice. Marcus noticed anyway, not because he had been trying to invade her privacy, but because years of reading boardrooms had trained him to recognize details other people overlooked. He had seen billion-dollar negotiations collapse over less tension than she had quietly carried without letting her shoulders fall. "Will you be all right getting home?" he asked. Naomi offered the same polite smile she gave almost everyone. "We always get home." It was not an answer to his question, yet somehow it told him more than a detailed explanation could have. Ethan hurried inside the moment she pushed open the door. Rainwater glistened on his small sneakers as he wrapped both arms around her waist. "Mom, are we late?" he asked, looking up with wide brown eyes. "Not at all," she replied, brushing a few damp curls from his forehead. "Everything just took a little longer." Ethan looked curiously toward Marcus, then back at his mother. Children often sense tension without understanding its source. "Is everything okay?" he whispered. Naomi crouched until they were eye level. "Yes." She rested one hand gently against his cheek. "Sometimes grown-ups remember things differently. That is why we wait for the truth instead of fighting over it." Ethan considered that with the serious expression children sometimes borrowed from adults. Then he nodded once, apparently satisfied. Marcus felt unexpectedly unsettled by the exchange. There had been no bitterness in her words. No attempt to make herself look better in front of her son. She had simply taught him patience. His own father had once done the same after a misunderstanding between neighbors many years ago. Back then, Marcus had been 10 years old, furious that someone had accused him of breaking a mailbox he had actually tried to repair. His father had stopped him from shouting and said, "The truth does not become stronger because your voice gets louder." Marcus had not thought about that afternoon in decades. Success had gradually replaced lessons with strategies, principles with efficiency. Somewhere along the way, certainty had become more comfortable than listening. Naomi thanked the cashier one final time and took Ethan's hand. Before reaching the door, she paused, turned back, and looked directly at Marcus. "I hope the ticket belongs to whoever honestly bought it," she said quietly. "Even if that is not me." The words landed with surprising force. She had every reason to hope the opposite. Yet she chose honesty over desperation. Marcus watched the door close behind them as a cold gust of rain-scented air briefly swept through the store. Outside, Naomi zipped Ethan's jacket to his chin before slipping off one glove to warm his small hand inside her own. Together they disappeared beneath the streetlights, their reflections stretching across the wet sidewalk until the rain slowly swallowed them into the Chicago night. Marcus remained standing beside the coffee station long after they were gone, staring at the safe beneath the counter instead of the envelope hidden inside it. For the first time in years, he found himself wondering whether the most valuable thing left in that little convenience store had never been the scratch ticket at all. Marcus did not drink the coffee he had paid for. It sat untouched beside him until the paper cup grew lukewarm beneath the fluorescent lights, the thin ribbon of steam disappearing long before the questions in his mind did. Outside, the rain continued falling in soft sheets across the parking lot, blurring headlights into streaks of white and gold. His phone vibrated again. Another message from his executive assistant reminded him that tomorrow's breakfast meeting with investors had been moved to 7 o'clock sharp. Beneath it waited 3 missed calls from the chairman of the board and nearly 40 unread emails marked urgent. Normally, he would have answered every one before leaving the parking lot. Tonight, he slipped the phone back into his coat pocket without reading another word. 5 minutes later, his driver eased the black sedan through downtown Chicago, windshield wipers keeping steady rhythm against the rain. Towering office buildings reflected across the wet pavement like polished mirrors. Marcus rested his forehead lightly against the cool window, watching strangers hurry home beneath umbrellas. Years ago, he used to wonder where everyone was going. Now he only wondered how quickly he could reach his next meeting. Somewhere along the journey, life had quietly transformed into calendars instead of conversations. His penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower overlooking Lake Michigan. Every surface inside reflected success. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, carefully selected artwork, furniture designed more for admiration than comfort. The silence greeted him before the lights did. No television, no music, no voices waiting from another room. His housekeeper had already left dinner warming beneath a silver cover, exactly as she did every Thursday. Marcus loosened his tie and walked past the dining table without lifting it. Instead, he stopped beside a bookshelf where a single framed photograph rested among business awards and leadership trophies. It showed a much younger Marcus standing beside his father outside a small neighborhood hardware store. Both were smiling, their jackets dusted with sawdust after spending an entire Saturday repairing shelves for free because an elderly owner could not afford replacements. His father had never become wealthy. He had retired after 37 years as a public school principal. Believing character was measured by what people did when no one applauded. Marcus picked up the photograph almost absent-mindedly. He remembered another rainy evening not unlike this one. He had been 14 and furious after losing a statewide debate competition because a judge mistakenly counted another student's score twice. Marcus had demanded that his father call the organizers and threaten legal action. Instead, his father had quietly driven him back to the school gymnasium. They waited while volunteers recounted every ballot. Nearly 2 hours later, the officials admitted the mistake. Marcus had won after all. On the drive home, he asked why his father had not simply called someone important. His father smiled without taking his eyes off the road. Because the truth should arrive on its own feet, he had answered. If power carries it there, people stop trusting the truth and start trusting power. Marcus slowly lowered the photograph. He had not remembered those words in years. Somewhere between mergers worth billions of dollars and headlines praising his decisiveness, he had unconsciously become the kind of man who expected certainty because certainty had rarely failed him. At the convenience store, he had spoken with confidence, not arrogance. Yet confidence from someone like him carried a different weight. People naturally leaned toward believing the billionaire before they knew the facts. Even he had not questioned that instinct until Naomi quietly refused to let either of them claim the ticket without proof. His thoughts drifted back to the little boy standing patiently beneath the awning, trusting his mother with the complete confidence only children possess. Ethan had never looked frightened. He had looked proud. Marcus wondered how many difficult days had shaped that quiet strength inside both of them. A soft chime echoed through the apartment as another notification appeared on his phone. This time it was not from work, but from an old college friend forwarding a business magazine article celebrating Ellison Capital's newest acquisition. The headline called Marcus one of the country's most reliable decision-makers. He stared at the glowing screen before locking it again. Reliable. The word suddenly felt strangely incomplete. He had spent decades building companies by trusting evidence, numbers, and instinct. Yet tonight, instinct alone had placed an honest woman under suspicion in front of strangers. He had not intended harm. Intentions, however, rarely erased consequences. Across the city, as rain continued tapping against thousands of windows, Marcus walked back toward the photograph of his father and gently straightened the frame that had somehow tilted over time. Then he looked out across the dark skyline, where countless apartment lights shimmered beneath the clouds. Somewhere beyond those distant streets, Naomi was probably helping Ethan finish homework or preparing tomorrow's lunch before another early shift. Somewhere in a locked safe inside a small convenience store rested an unopened envelope that now held far more than a lottery ticket. Without realizing it, Marcus found himself hoping that when morning came, the truth would not simply answer who owned the ticket. He hoped it might answer what kind of man he had quietly become. Friday morning arrived wrapped in pale winter sunlight that struggled to break through low gray clouds hanging over Chicago. Naomi unlocked the employee entrance of Greenview Senior Care at 6:45, balancing a paper cup of coffee in one hand and her lunch container in the other. The familiar scent of disinfectant, fresh laundry, and oatmeal greeted her before the automatic doors closed behind her. Within minutes, she had tied back her hair, slipped on her navy scrub jacket, and begun helping residents prepare for breakfast. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks refused to wear the blue sweater because it reminded her of the nursing home where her husband had spent his final months. Mr. Donnelly insisted on telling the same Navy story every Friday before taking his morning medication. Naomi listened as though she had never heard it before, smiling at exactly the right moments. Caring for people was rarely dramatic. It was measured in blankets adjusted over cold knees, water glasses quietly refilled before someone asked, and remembering who preferred strawberry jam instead of grape. During her first short break, she opened her phone only to send Ethan a simple message through the school tablet his classroom used. Have a wonderful day. Remember that kindness is something nobody can ever take from you. A few seconds later, his reply appeared with a smiling face he had drawn himself. Love you, Mom. I got 100% on my spelling test. Naomi smiled so warmly that another nurse noticed. Good news, her coworker Melissa asked while pouring coffee into a chipped mug. The best kind, Naomi answered. My son remembered he is braver than he thinks. She almost mentioned the strange encounter from the night before, but decided against it. She wanted the truth before the story. Across the city, Marcus arrived at Ellison Capital headquarters precisely at 7 o'clock. The lobby buzzed with polished efficiency as executives hurried toward conference rooms carrying tablets, portfolios, and expensive coffee. Glass walls reflected the skyline, while digital displays tracked global markets in real time. During the investor breakfast, Marcus answered every financial question with his usual calm precision, yet twice he found himself pausing unexpectedly. His chief financial officer noticed. Everything all right? She quietly asked once the presentation ended. Marcus nodded automatically, although he knew the answer was less certain than usual. After the meeting, instead of heading directly into another scheduled conference, he called his executive assistant, Claire. I need an hour before my next appointment. She blinked in surprise. Your calendar is completely full until this evening. Marcus looked out across the city. Move whatever you have to move. 30 minutes later, he found himself standing once again inside the same neighborhood convenience store. Morning sunlight spilled across the front windows where the rain had finally stopped. The elderly cashier immediately recognized him. Back already? He asked with a tired smile. Marcus glanced toward the small office safe beneath the register. Has anyone looked at the security footage? The cashier sighed apologetically. I tried before opening. The recording skips almost 12 minutes right around the time both of you were here. He shook his head with obvious frustration. The technician is coming this afternoon, but I am not optimistic. Marcus remained silent. He had expected disappointment, yet hearing it aloud made the uncertainty feel heavier. The cashier hesitated before continuing. I checked the inventory this morning. One ticket was definitely sold to you earlier yesterday. One was definitely sold to Miss Carter later that evening. But because the tickets come from the same roll, there is no way to know which physical ticket belonged to which customer. Marcus slowly looked toward the display rack, where fresh lottery tickets now waited in perfect rows. Such an ordinary object. Such extraordinary consequences. She still believes it could belong to me, the cashier said quietly. Most people would not have left it here. Marcus thought of Naomi placing the envelope on the counter with her own hands. She had protected his chance as carefully as her own. The cashier folded his arms against the counter. Can I tell you something? Marcus nodded. I have worked behind this register for 28 years. I have seen people argue over 10 cents. I have watched families stop speaking because of money. Last night was the first time I ever saw someone who needed hope more than cash. Marcus frowned slightly. What do you mean? The old man smiled sadly. She never once asked how much the ticket might be worth. She only asked that the truth be given time. Those words settled into the silence between them. Marcus suddenly remembered something else from the previous evening. Naomi had never scratched the ticket. She had not even looked to see whether it had won a single dollar before surrendering it for safekeeping. She had been willing to lose a fortune rather than keep something that might not belong to her. At that same moment, his phone vibrated with a notification from a local news application. A customer inside the store had apparently shared a brief video from the previous night. The headline spreading across social media read, "Billionaire claims lottery ticket purchased by single mother." Marcus stared at the screen for several long seconds before locking it again. The envelope inside the safe had not moved overnight, yet somehow the story surrounding it already had, and for the first time he realized the greatest damage might never come from losing the ticket, but from allowing an honest woman's name to become part of a story that the truth had not yet finished telling. By late afternoon, the story had traveled much farther than the small convenience store where it began. It appeared first on neighborhood discussion pages, then on local news feeds, carried not by facts, but by a 23-second video that captured only the moment Marcus calmly saying the ticket belonged to him. Everything before that had been cut away. Everything after Naomi suggested sealing the ticket had been left out entirely. Thousands of strangers filled the missing pieces with their own assumptions. Some insisted the wealthy man was bullying a struggling mother. Others claimed the woman had obviously tried to keep something that was not hers. Very few admitted they simply did not know. Naomi knew nothing about the growing attention until the end of her shift. She changed out of her scrubs, thanked the evening nurse taking over her patients, and finally looked at the messages waiting on her phone. Melissa had sent a link with a short note beneath it. "I hope this is not what I think it is." Naomi tapped the screen. The video began playing without sound. She watched herself standing quietly beside the counter while Marcus spoke. Then the clip ended. No explanation. No resolution. Just enough uncertainty to invite judgment. Her stomach tightened, not because people disagreed, but because Ethan was old enough to read comments if one of his classmates found the story first. She locked the phone and slipped it into her purse before taking a slow breath. Outside, the air carried the sharp scent of melting snow mixed with passing traffic. Ethan was waiting in the daycare lobby across the street, sitting at a small table covered with crayons and construction paper. The moment he saw her, his face brightened exactly as it always did. "Look, Mom." He proudly held up a drawing of two people standing beneath one umbrella while bright yellow sunlight pushed through gray clouds. "That is us after the rain stops." Naomi smiled and kissed the top of his head. "I like that very much." She did not tell him about the video. Some burdens belonged to adults until children were strong enough to carry them. Across downtown, Marcus was ending another board meeting when Claire quietly entered his office carrying a tablet. She hesitated before placing it on his desk. "You should probably see this." The screen displayed the same video, except now it had accumulated hundreds of thousands of views. The comments moved faster than he could read them. Some praised him. Others condemned him. A few had already identified Naomi by searching public records connected to the senior care facility where she worked. Marcus's expression hardened, not with anger, but with regret. "Has anyone from our communications team responded?" Claire nodded. "They prepared a statement saying there is an ongoing misunderstanding and that you are cooperating fully." Marcus looked up. "Did we ask Miss Carter if she wanted to become part of a public statement?" Claire blinked. "No." He gently pushed the tablet aside. "Then we will not use her name." Claire studied him for a moment before quietly leaving the office. Marcus remained seated long after the door closed. For years he had believed every problem moved toward resolution if handled quickly and decisively. This one seemed to grow larger each time someone tried to simplify it. Money could hire attorneys. Reputation could shape headlines. Neither could restore privacy once strangers decided they already knew someone else's character. That evening, Marcus returned once more to the convenience store, hoping for news from the security technician. The elderly cashier greeted him with tired eyes. "Bad timing," he said softly. "The hard drive is damaged. The missing minutes cannot be recovered." Marcus lowered his head. The answer felt strangely final. The cashier reached beneath the counter and rested one hand on the small office safe. The envelope is still exactly where she left it. Marcus nodded without speaking. Just then the entrance bell chimed. A delivery driver carrying newspaper bundles stepped inside, stamping melting snow from his boots. He recognized the cashier immediately. "Quite the excitement you all had yesterday," he said with an awkward grin. "I almost missed my route watching everything from outside." Marcus slowly turned toward him. "You were here." The driver shrugged. "Only for a minute or two while unloading papers." He frowned thoughtfully, as though searching through a memory that had not seemed important until now. "I cannot remember much, but I do remember the lady reaching into her wallet before you even walked through the door. I noticed because she counted out one single dollar bill real carefully." The cashier looked up. Marcus felt his heartbeat slow instead of quicken. It was not proof. Not yet. But for the first time since the envelope had been sealed inside the safe, uncertainty had shifted ever so slightly away from assumption and toward truth. The delivery driver's words lingered in the quiet store long after he left with his empty newspaper cart. Marcus stood motionless beside the register, replaying the brief memory the man had described. Naomi had already counted out her last dollar before he ever stepped inside. It was a small detail, almost invisible, yet it carried the quiet weight of honesty. The cashier rested both hands on the counter and let out a slow breath. "It still is not enough to prove ownership," he admitted. "But it changes how yesterday feels." Marcus nodded. "No," he answered softly. "It changes how I feel." The drive back to his office seemed longer than usual. Traffic crawled beneath a gray evening sky while city lights slowly awakened one building at a time. His phone continued vibrating with messages from public relations consultants suggesting carefully crafted statements that would protect the company's reputation. One advisor recommended emphasizing uncertainty. Another suggested offering the woman a generous settlement to end public speculation. Marcus read each proposal before quietly deleting every draft. None of them mentioned her dignity. None of them acknowledged that a person's reputation could not simply be compensated after strangers had questioned it. The following morning began with another wave of attention. Several reporters had already gathered outside the convenience store, hoping for updates. Curious neighbors stopped to photograph the entrance where nothing had happened except two people waiting patiently for the truth. Inside Greenview Senior Care, Naomi noticed unfamiliar glances before anyone spoke. A nursing assistant approached hesitantly while folding fresh towels. "I saw something online last night," she said carefully. "I just wanted you to know. I never believed the comments." Naomi smiled with genuine gratitude. "Thank you." She returned to helping Mrs. Brooks button her cardigan, refusing to let internet speculation become more important than the woman waiting patiently in front of her. Yet the whispers followed quietly through the hallways. Some co-workers avoided mentioning the story altogether. Others watched her with sympathetic eyes that somehow made the burden heavier instead of lighter. During lunch break, Naomi stepped outside into the small employee garden where winter had stripped most flowers from their beds. She sat alone on a wooden bench while cold wind carried dried leaves across the sidewalk. Her phone rang unexpectedly. The caller identification displayed an unfamiliar downtown office number. She hesitated before answering. "Miss Carter," Claire's calm voice came through the speaker. "My name is Claire. I work for Mr. Ellison. He would like to speak with you, if you are comfortable doing so." Naomi remained silent for a moment. "About the ticket? About what happened?" Naomi looked across the quiet garden where bare tree branches swayed gently against the pale sky. "If this is about money, there is nothing to discuss." Claire answered immediately. "He asked me to tell you that it is not." After another pause, Naomi quietly agreed to meet later that afternoon at the convenience store where everything had begun. When Marcus arrived, there were no reporters left. The cashier had purposely closed the small seating area for 15 minutes to give them privacy. Naomi entered carrying Ethan's backpack over one shoulder because she had picked him up directly from school. The little boy sat near the front window reading a library book while the adults spoke several feet away. Marcus did not begin with explanations. He did not mention lawyers, public relations teams, or media coverage. Instead, he looked directly at Naomi and said, "I owe you an apology." She studied him carefully without speaking. "Not because we still do not know who owns the ticket," he continued, "but because my certainty placed you in a position where you had to defend your honesty in front of strangers. Whether I intended it or not, that happened because of me." Naomi listened quietly, her expression thoughtful rather than forgiving. Intentions matter, she finally replied. But consequences matter too. Marcus nodded slowly. I know. She glanced toward Ethan, who had become completely absorbed in his book. Do you know what frightened me most? She asked. Marcus expected her to mention the money. Instead, she said, that one day my son might believe people with power are believed before people with truth. The words settled over the room with remarkable gentleness. Yet Marcus felt them more deeply than any public criticism. They reminded him of his father's voice decades earlier, standing beside that old hardware store, telling a teenage boy that power should never outrun truth. Somewhere along the years, he had forgotten. The cashier quietly approached from behind the register carrying the sealed envelope. The state lottery office finally called, he said. They agreed to examine the ticket, the sales records, and every serial number connected to yesterday's transactions. They want both of you present tomorrow morning. Naomi looked at the unopened envelope, then at Marcus. Neither reached for it. Neither spoke first. Yet for the first time since their paths crossed, they were no longer standing on opposite sides of the same question. They were standing beside the same truth, waiting for it to speak before either of them did. Saturday morning arrived with crisp blue skies that made the city seem almost washed clean after 2 days of rain. Naomi held Ethan's hand as they walked toward the Illinois Lottery Regional Office, the same faded blue backpack resting comfortably on his shoulders. The envelope remained in the possession of the convenience store cashier, exactly as it had since the night everything began. Marcus arrived a few minutes later, wearing a simple navy coat instead of the tailored suits that usually filled financial magazines. There were no television cameras inside the office, only a quiet reception area where lottery employees greeted them with professional courtesy rather than curiosity. A compliance supervisor invited everyone into a modest conference room where the envelope was placed carefully in the center of a plain wooden table. The room felt surprisingly ordinary. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, a coffee machine humming softly in the hallway. It seemed fitting that something capable of changing lives would be examined in a place that looked so completely ordinary. The supervisor broke the seal while another employee compared the ticket's serial number with the retailer's electronic sales records. No one spoke during the next several minutes. Papers were reviewed. Timestamps were compared. Inventory logs were examined one page at a time. Ethan quietly swung his feet beneath his chair, occasionally glancing at his mother before returning to the coloring book the receptionist had given him. Finally, the supervisor looked up with a gentle smile. We have our answer. The room seemed to hold its breath. The transaction records show that Mr. Ellison purchased ticket number 327 at 6:14 yesterday evening. Miss Carter purchased ticket number 328 at 8:53. The ticket inside this envelope is number 328. He carefully turned the ticket over so everyone could see the printed serial number matching the report. It belongs to Miss Carter. Silence settled across the room before anyone reacted. Naomi closed her eyes for only a second, not from excitement, but from relief. Marcus lowered his head slightly, the quiet acknowledgement carrying more weight than words. The supervisor smiled again. There is one more thing. He ran the ticket through the lottery scanner resting on the table. A soft electronic tone sounded, followed by another. The computer screen displayed the result. The room remained silent as the supervisor read it twice to be certain. Congratulations, Miss Carter. This ticket is worth $500,000 before taxes. Ethan looked at his mother with wide eyes. Mom, does that mean we can fix the heater? Naomi laughed through tears she had not realized were waiting. She wrapped both arms around him and whispered, Yes, sweetheart. We can fix the heater. She did not scream. She did not collapse. She simply held her son a little tighter, as though the greatest prize had never been the money itself but the chance to stop worrying about every tomorrow. Marcus slowly stood. Before anyone says another word, he began, looking first at Naomi and then toward the lottery employees. I need to say something. His voice remained calm, yet every sentence carried unmistakable sincerity. Miss Carter never tried to keep something that was not hers. She protected my opportunity as carefully as her own. I allowed my confidence to place her integrity under public suspicion, and for that I am deeply sorry. Naomi looked at him quietly. There was no performance in his apology. No audience waiting beyond the conference room walls. Only the people who had lived through the misunderstanding together. Marcus continued, I cannot erase what strangers said about you, but I can stop pretending that intentions matter more than consequences. Naomi studied him for a long moment before answering. Thank you for saying that. She paused gently. People do not become trustworthy because they never make mistakes. They become trustworthy because they tell the truth after they make them. Marcus nodded, accepting her words without trying to improve them. Later that afternoon, after the paperwork was completed, several reporters waiting outside called Naomi's name as she stepped onto the sidewalk. Microphones stretched toward her while cameras clicked rapidly. She stopped only long enough to offer one brief statement. The money will help my family, she said. But what I hope people remember is something else. If we had rushed to judgment instead of waiting for the truth, every one of us would have lost something far more valuable than this ticket. She thanked them politely, then took Ethan's hand and walked away. Marcus remained several steps behind, answering none of the shouted questions directed toward him. For the first time in many years, he understood that not every victory belonged to the person with the most influence. Sometimes the greatest act of leadership was simply choosing to stand behind the truth after someone else had the courage to stand there first. 3 months later, the first snow of the season settled quietly across the sidewalks outside the same neighborhood convenience store where everything had begun. The familiar bell above the entrance still chimed each time someone stepped inside, and the old refrigerators still hummed with the same steady rhythm. Very little about the place had changed. Yet somehow it no longer felt exactly the same. Naomi pushed open the door with one hand, while Ethan hurried in beside her, now wearing a brand new winter coat that fit perfectly without needing room to grow into next year. His cheeks were rosy from the cold, and his laughter filled the small store as naturally as the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the aisles. The elderly cashier looked up from the register and smiled the moment he recognized them. Well, he said warmly, my favorite mother and son are back. Naomi smiled in return. We promised we would visit. She had kept many promises over the past few months. The apartment heater no longer rattled through freezing nights because it had finally been replaced. Ethan's asthma treatments were scheduled without worrying about insurance deductibles or delaying another appointment until payday. She still worked at Greenview Senior Care, although now only 4 days each week instead of constantly volunteering for extra overnight shifts. Several people had suggested she retire early or buy a large house in another neighborhood. Naomi had quietly declined every suggestion. She liked her patience. She liked knowing Mrs. Brooks still preferred strawberry jam every Friday morning and that Mr. Donnelly continued telling the same Navy story before breakfast. Money had changed her circumstances, but it had not changed the woman who found purpose in small acts of care. She had also quietly established a scholarship fund for single parents studying nursing and caregiving, asking that the applications never mention her name publicly. People helped me by believing the truth, she once told the foundation director. I would rather help others believe in tomorrow. Across the city, changes had unfolded inside Ellison Capital as well. Marcus had introduced a new company policy requiring leadership teams to review employee concerns directly before public decisions affected individual workers. More importantly, he had begun visiting departments without cameras, speeches, or announcements, spending time listening instead of presenting. His executives had noticed that meetings became slightly shorter while conversations became noticeably longer. Some questioned the changes at first. Others quietly embraced them. Marcus rarely explained why. He simply remembered his father's voice whenever certainty arrived too quickly. As Naomi paid for a loaf of bread and a carton of milk, the cashier chuckled. You know, people still ask me about that envelope from time to time. Naomi laughed softly. I hope you tell them it was never really about the ticket. I do, he answered. Some understand. Some do not. Before she could respond, the entrance bell rang again. Marcus stepped inside carrying nothing more than a pair of gloves tucked beneath one arm. He had stopped on his way back from a nearby community event after recognizing the familiar storefront from across the street. For a brief moment, all three adults simply smiled, no longer strangers connected by misunderstanding, but people who had shared an unexpected lesson. Ethan noticed him first and waved enthusiastically. Hi, Mr. Marcus. Marcus smiled. Hello, Ethan. How is school? I got an A on my science project, Ethan answered proudly. Mom says plants grow better if somebody remembers to water them. Marcus laughed. Your mother sounds very wise. Naomi shook her head with quiet amusement. He leaves out the part where he forgot twice. Only twice. Ethan corrected with complete seriousness. They all laughed together, the sound blending naturally with the ordinary life of the little store. As Naomi reached for her wallet, Ethan gently touched her sleeve. "Wait here," he whispered before jogging toward the lottery display. He carefully counted a few coins from the small allowance he had saved in his jacket pocket and placed $1 on the counter. "One scratch ticket, please." The cashier handed it to him with a knowing smile. Ethan returned and proudly placed the untouched ticket into his mother's hand. "This one is really yours," he said. Naomi looked down at the small paper rectangle resting in her palm, so ordinary that no one passing by would have given it a second glance. She smiled, but instead of scratching it immediately, she slipped it carefully into her wallet beside the old photograph that had never left its place. Marcus noticed the gesture. "You are not going to see if it wins?" he asked gently. Naomi looked first at Ethan, then through the front window where soft snowflakes drifted beneath the afternoon light. "It already has," she answered quietly. She took Ethan's hand, thanked the cashier, wished Marcus a peaceful holiday season, and stepped outside into the fresh snow. Their footprints stretched side by side along the sidewalk, growing smaller as they disappeared into the quiet neighborhood. Through the window, Marcus watched them until they became two distant figures wrapped in winter sunlight. Then he smiled to himself, not because someone had won a prize, but because the truth had arrived exactly as his father once promised. It had walked there on its own feet. Thank you so much for watching. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need a little hope today. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and tell me what this story meant to you, or which moment stayed with you the most. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one. Until next time, take care of yourself. God bless you.